My friend, listen to me. You may have lost time, you may have lost opportunities, but hear me when I say, God is not finished with you yet. The enemy wants you to believe that your best days are behind you, that the wasted years cannot be restored. But I came to tell you today, God is a God of restoration. He is not limited by time, by circumstances, by the mistakes of your past. If He spoke a promise over your life, He will bring it to pass. And today you need to stand on His word and declare, my wasted years will be restored. My purpose will be fulfilled. My breakthrough is coming. Do you believe it? Then get ready, because God is about to do something powerful in your life. God operates outside of time. He is not bound by human limitations, nor is He restricted by past failures or missed opportunities. What seems lost to you is never lost to Him. The years you think were wasted, the moments you regret, the opportunities that slip through your fingers, God holds all of them in His hands. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, and He sees the full picture of your life. In the natural, time lost can never be recovered. Once a year has passed, it's gone forever. But with God, restoration is possible in ways that defy human understanding. He can bring back what you lost, not just in the same measure, but in an even greater way. When He restores, He doesn't just replace, He multiplies. What you thought was over, He can breathe life into again. Think about Job. He lost everything, his wealth, his health, his family, but God restored him with double what he had before. Job's years of suffering were not in vain, because God turned them into a testimony of His power. The same God who restored Job is the same God working in your life. He doesn't change. His ability to restore what was lost is not dependent on circumstances, time, or human effort. Some of the greatest breakthroughs come after seasons of loss. Sometimes what we see as wasted time was actually preparation. God was molding you, shaping you, refining you for something greater. What you thought was a setback was a setup for a comeback. The relationships that fell apart, the dreams that seemed to fade, the opportunities that you missed, God knows how to bring things back around in ways you never expected. Your past mistakes do not cancel God's promises. No matter what you have done, no matter how far you think you have strayed, God's plans for your life remain intact. He does not revoke His calling because of your failures. Humans may give up on you. Society may label you as unworthy, and even you may feel like you have disqualified yourself. But God's promises are not based on your perfection. They are based on His faithfulness. Look at the life of Peter. He walked with Jesus, saw miracles firsthand, yet in a moment of fear, he denied even knowing Him. By human standards, Peter's failure should have disqualified him from his destiny. But Jesus didn't see him as a failure. He saw a future leader. After the resurrection, Jesus restored Peter, reaffirming his purpose, and Peter went on to preach on the day of Pentecost, leading thousands to salvation. His mistake didn't cancel God's plan. It became a part of his testimony. David, a man after God's own heart, made terrible choices. He committed sins that should have destroyed his future. Yet when he turned back to God, he was restored, and through his lineage came the Messiah. Paul persecuted Christians before encountering Jesus, yet he became one of the most powerful apostles in history. The pattern is clear. God doesn't call the perfect, He calls the willing. You may think you have wasted too much time, made too many wrong choices, or fallen too far. But if God has spoken a promise over your life, it still stands. His word does not return void. What He planned for you before your mistakes, He can still bring to pass after them. He is a God of redemption, and nothing you've done can override His grace. What the enemy meant for harm, God will turn for your good. There are moments in life when everything seems to be falling apart. You face setbacks, betrayals, disappointments, and losses that shake your faith. The enemy wants you to believe that these moments define you, that your pain is permanent, and that your story is over. But God sees what the enemy is trying to do, and he has already planned a turnaround. What was meant to destroy you will be the very thing God uses to elevate you. Look at Joseph. His own brothers betrayed him, throwing him into a pit and selling him into slavery. He was falsely accused and imprisoned for years. Every step of his journey looked like a setback, yet God was setting him up for something greater. When the time was right, God raised him from the prison to the palace, making him second in command over Egypt. The very thing that was meant to break him became the path to his destiny. When Joseph finally faced his brothers again, he didn't seek revenge. Instead, he declared, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." This principle runs throughout the Bible. The Israelites were enslaved in Egypt for 400 years, but God used their oppression as the foundation for one of the greatest deliverance stories in history. Jesus himself was crucified, and the enemy thought it was the ultimate victory. But what looked like the worst defeat turned into the greatest triumph. His resurrection brought salvation to the world. Your pain, your struggles, your losses, they are not wasted. God knows how to take what was meant to harm you and transform it into something powerful. He can use your trials to strengthen you, position you, and prepare you for something far greater than you ever imagined. Delay is not denial. God's timing is perfect. When things don't happen as quickly as you hoped, it's easy to feel like God has forgotten you. You pray, you wait, you believe, but nothing seems to change. The enemy whispers that it's too late, that your opportunity has passed, that others have moved ahead while you've been left behind. But what you see as a delay, God sees as preparation. He is never late, never early. He moves at the exact time that aligns with his perfect plan for your life. Abraham was given a promise that he would be the father of many nations, yet he waited 25 years before Isaac was born. To human eyes, it seemed like God was taking too long. Sarah even laughed at the idea of having a child in her old age. But God was not late. He was working in ways they couldn't see. He was aligning circumstances, strengthening Abraham's faith, and ensuring that when the promise was fulfilled, it would be undeniable that it was God's doing. Lazarus was sick, and his sisters begged Jesus to come and heal him. But Jesus delayed, and Lazarus died. To those around him, it looked like he had missed his opportunity. But Jesus wasn't late. He was about to perform a greater miracle than anyone expected. When he arrived, he didn't just heal a sick man. He raised a dead man. The delay wasn't a denial. It was a setup for something more powerful. You may feel like your season of waiting is wasted time, but God is working behind the scenes. His timing is strategic. He is preparing the right people, the right circumstances, and the right moment for your breakthrough. What seems like a delay is actually divine positioning for something greater. Restoration starts with faith. Believe that God is working. Before you see change, before anything in your life begins to shift, you have to believe that God is already at work. Faith is the foundation of restoration. If you keep looking at your past, your failures, or the time you think was wasted, you will stay stuck in regret. But when you choose to believe that God is still moving, still orchestrating, still redeeming, then you open the door for restoration to begin. The woman with the issue of blood suffered for 12 years. Doctors had failed her. Resources had run out. And by all human logic, her condition was permanent. But something changed the moment she believed that if she could just touch the hem of Jesus' garment, she would be healed. Her faith activated her restoration. It wasn't just about the touch. It was about her belief that Jesus had the power to change her situation. In Ezekiel 37, God showed the prophet a valley full of dry bones and asked, "Can these bones live?" From a human perspective, the answer was obvious, no. But when Ezekiel obeyed God's command to prophesy over the bones, life was restored to what was once lifeless. Faith requires speaking what you believe, even before you see it. God wasn't asking Ezekiel to fix the bones. He was asking him to trust in God's power to restore them. If you want restoration, you must start speaking in faith. You may not see the breakthrough yet, but declare that it's coming. You may not see doors opening yet, but trust that they are on the way. Faith moves mountains. Faith revives dead situations, and faith positions you to receive what God has already prepared for you. God can accelerate blessings. What took years can happen in moments. You may feel like you've lost too much time, like you're too far behind to ever catch up. But God is not bound by human timelines. When He restores, He doesn't just bring things back, He accelerates them. What should have taken years can happen in an instant when His favor is upon you. He can position you, promote you, and pour out blessings so quickly that it will leave you in awe. Look at Joseph. He spent years as a slave and a prisoner, seemingly forgotten. But in a single day, he was called out of the prison and placed in the palace as second in command over Egypt. He didn't climb the ranks step by step. God accelerated his promotion. One moment he was in chains, the next he was wearing royal robes. That's the power of divine acceleration. The disciples had fished all night and caught nothing. They had used all their skill, all their effort, and still came up empty. But when Jesus told them to cast their nets on the other side, in a single moment, their situation changed. The net was so full of fish that they could barely pull it in. They went from lack to overflow, from struggle to abundance, not because they worked harder, but because they obeyed God's word and He accelerated their blessing. You may think you've wasted years, but God can restore in a moment what was lost. The job you thought would take decades to reach, He can open in a day. The relationship you thought was beyond repair, He can heal in an instant. When God moves, He moves fast. What took others years to achieve, He can release to you in a supernatural moment. Forgive yourself and others. Don't let the past hold you back. One of the biggest barriers to restoration is unforgiveness. You cannot move forward if you are still chained to past hurts, disappointments, and regrets. Whether it's bitterness towards someone who wronged you or guilt over your own mistakes, holding on to the past will only keep you stuck. True restoration begins when you release what's behind you and trust God to make all things new. Joseph had every reason to be bitter. His own brothers betrayed him, selling him into slavery. He endured years of hardship because of their actions. But when he finally had the power to punish them, he chose to forgive. Instead of revenge, he embraced them and said, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." His ability to forgive allowed him to step fully into the blessing God had prepared for him. Had he held on to resentment, he might have missed the very thing God was doing through him. The prodigal son wasted his inheritance on reckless living. He made mistakes that could have left him in shame for the rest of his life. But when he decided to return to his father, he was met with open arms, not condemnation. His father's forgiveness restored him. But first, he had to forgive himself enough to come home. Unforgiveness is a weight that slows you down, but restoration requires freedom. When you forgive, you free yourself from the past. When you let go of bitterness, you make room for blessing. You don't have to carry guilt, regret, or anger any longer. God is ready to restore, but you must be willing to release what is holding you back. Let go, trust Him, and watch Him restore what was lost. Stay obedient and aligned with God's plan. Restoration is not just about receiving what was lost. It's about walking in the path God has set for you. Many people miss their season of restoration because they stray from His will, trying to fix things in their own strength or take shortcuts. But true restoration comes when you stay obedient, trusting that God's way is always the best way. Noah was given instructions to build an ark long before there was a sign of rain. He could have ignored God's command, questioned His timing, or tried to do things differently. But because he remained obedient, he and his family were saved, and God gave him a new beginning. His obedience led to restoration. The Israelites were promised the land of Canaan, but their disobedience delayed their blessing. What should have been a short journey turned into 40 years of wandering. God had already prepared their restoration, but they had to be aligned with Him to receive it. When they finally obeyed, the walls of Jericho fell and they stepped into the promise. Peter and the disciples were fishing all night with no results, but when Jesus told them to cast their nets again, they obeyed, even though it didn't make sense. Their obedience led to a supernatural catch of fish, showing that when you follow God's instructions, He blesses beyond measure. God's restoration is available, but it requires faithfulness. When you seek Him first, when you walk in His ways, when you follow His direction, even when it doesn't make sense, that's when doors begin to open. Stay in alignment, keep trusting, and remain obedient. What God has planned for you is far greater than anything you could achieve on your own. Declare restoration over your life. Speak life, not defeat. The words you speak have power. If you keep saying, "I've wasted too much time, it's too late for me," or "nothing will ever change," you are reinforcing defeat in your life. But when you begin to declare God's promises, when you speak restoration over your situation, you align yourself with His power to restore. In Ezekiel 37, God led the prophet to a valley of dry bones and asked, "Can these bones live?" From a human perspective, they were lifeless, hopeless. But God instructed Ezekiel to prophesy, to speak life over them. As he obeyed, the bones came together, flesh appeared, and breath entered them. What was once dead was fully restored, all because of the power of God's word spoken through faith. Jesus said in Mark 11:23 that if you speak to the mountain and do not doubt, it will move. Your situation may look like a mountain, but what are you speaking over it? Are you declaring defeat, or are you speaking restoration? Are you focusing on what you lost, or are you declaring that God will restore and multiply? Job lost everything, but he didn't curse God. He remained faithful. In the end, God restored him with twice as much as he had before. Your words in the waiting season matter. Declare, "God is restoring my time. My best days are ahead of me. What was lost will come back greater, and I will walk in God's promises." Restoration begins in your mouth before it manifests in your life. Speak in faith, declare God's truth, and watch how He brings dead situations back to life. Your words have the power to shape your future. Your latter days will be greater than your former. God saves the best for last. It's easy to look at your past and think your best moments are behind you. Maybe you've faced losses, disappointments, or setbacks that make you feel like you'll never recover. But God's promise is clear. What's ahead is greater than what's behind. He is not a God of decline. He is a God of increase. When He restores, He doesn't just bring back what was lost. He makes it better than before. Job's story is a perfect example. He lost everything, his wealth, his health, his family. But because he remained faithful, God restored him with twice as much as he had before. His latter days were more blessed than his former. What seemed like the end was actually the setup for a greater chapter Haggai 2:9 declares, the glory of this present house will be greater than the glory of the former house. That means God is not just bringing you back to where you were, He is lifting you to a higher place. What He has planned for you is beyond what you can imagine. The relationships, opportunities, blessings, and breakthroughs ahead of you will outshine anything from your past. Think about Jesus' first miracle. He turned water into wine at a wedding, but not just any wine, the best wine. The master of the feast was amazed and said, "You have saved the best for last." That's how God works. You may feel like you've lost too much, but He is saving the best for your future. Don't settle in disappointment. Keep believing, keep trusting, because your latter days will be greater than anything you've seen before. No matter what you have lost, no matter how much time you think has been wasted, God is a God of restoration. He is not limited by time, mistakes, or circumstances. What seemed like a setback was only a setup for something greater. The years you thought were lost were never wasted in God's hands. He was preparing, refining, and positioning you for what's ahead. Your past does not define your future. Your failures do not cancel God's promises. What the enemy meant for harm, God will turn for your good. He can restore in a moment what took years to lose, and He can accelerate blessings beyond what you imagined. But restoration requires faith. You must believe that He is working even when you don't see it. You must align yourself with His plan, remain obedient, and declare restoration over your life. Forgive what needs to be forgiven. Let go of the weight of regret and step forward in faith. Speak life, not defeat. Declare that your best days are still ahead because God saves the best for last. He's not just bringing you back to where you were. He is taking you higher. He is multiplying, increasing, and elevating you beyond what you lost. This is your season of restoration. The years you thought were wasted will be redeemed. What you thought was over, God is bringing back to life. Your latter days will be greater than your former, and when God restores, it will be more than you ever expected. Trust Him, believe Him, and get ready, because restoration is here.